You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's intelligent Z optimization and transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues on the mainframe and how BMC AIME and BMC CompuWare Solutions can help you build a mainframe-inclusive DevOps toolchain. Hey everyone, welcome to the Modern Mainframe. I'm Matt Dallaire. Today we'll be discussing mainframe development as a career choice, how it's approached with students, why it's an attractive option, how modernization efforts have affected the job, and what the future holds. We have a special guest for today's episode. Tom Taulli is an author, speaker, and startup advisor. He's co-founded several companies, including WebIPO, BizEquity, and Hypermart.net, which was sold to Infospace.com. He has written on technology and finance for a variety of publications, including Forbes.com, Bloomberg.com, and Kiplinger, and he's authored several books, including Artificial Intelligence Basics, a non-technical introduction, and the Robotic Process Automation Handbook, a guide to implementing RPA systems, in addition to a number of training courses. I could go on, but let's welcome Tom to the show. Tom, it's a pleasure to have you on. Thank you for being here today.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So you recently wrote a book, Modern Mainframe Development, COBOL Databases and Next Generation Approaches, in which you cover development environments, languages, and databases, as well as modernization trends on the platform, like the adoption of DevOps, artificial intelligence, automation, and hybrid cloud strategies. What prompted you to write the book?
Yeah, I do have a background in mainframe, but it goes quite a bit far in my career. Actually, beginning of my career when I was in college, I used to work for a bank, and I got experience working with mainframes and COBOL and the different processes and so forth. Then after that, the internet came around. I changed direction. But in terms of what sparked this interest, it was actually the COVID-19 pandemic. And we saw that the unemployment insurance systems imploded because of the huge spike in requests for those systems. They just were not built for that. And so there were a lot of problems. And the result was that a lot of these states had to hire COBOL programmers to upgrade the systems. And I wrote about this in Forbes.com, and it turned out to be one of my most viewed articles. That was a bit of a surprise to me. And then you mentioned I developed some courses, and I thought, maybe I'll develop a course on COBOL and see how that does. And it did really well. And then Pluralsight, one of the top providers of IT courses, reached out to me and they go, mainframe is a high priority for us. We're having a hard time finding instructors. Would you be interested in being part of the team? And then I said, sounds great. So I did. But I thought if I'm going to spend all this time on it, maybe there's a book opportunity here. And, I went on to Amazon and found out there's, in terms of mainframe books and development, we're talking at least 10, 15 years when the last one was written. So I saw an opportunity, and that's drove me to this.
There are many career opportunities on the mainframe, but a shortage of talent. We've covered the topic of the mainframe on campus before on this podcast, as well as in blog posts and other venues. Why do you think there aren't more universities teaching the mainframe and encouraging students to take a look at the platform?
I think it's a good question, and my opinion would be they should reevaluate that policy. I don't know what could the reason be, but I can speculate. And I think professors like to focus on the cool stuff, and so, they'll have lots of courses on Python or the typical types of languages that you would see. And the perception is that, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And I think part of it is that, there is a lot of demand for those types of languages. But I do think that just before dismissing something like a legacy language like COBOL, maybe look into it a little bit more, because there are some changes occurring and there is more demand for these types of skill sets. So I do think these universities are missing out. But if they're going to miss out, then there are alternatives out there. There are online courses that can help out. Even just going to YouTube, and there are free courses that can provide some really good tutorials on how to develop on a mainframe, what is a mainframe, how to access a mainframe, and so on.
Right. So what's attractive about developing on the mainframe, not only for those coming out of school, but for those who might be looking for a career change?
Part of it is that COBOL is actually, in the languages, are actually pretty interesting. And then there's assembler, which is a difficult language to learn, but that's a challenge. I mean, developers like to, they love a challenge. And becoming a hotshot assembler programmer puts you, in a high caliber when it comes to getting jobs. So I think there's that part of it. But I also just think that the demand is there. I mean, and also the supply is so low. So if it's not being taught in schools, there are a lot of these developers, these mainframe developers are leaving the workforce because they're retiring. It just means less competition. As we speak today, Elon Musk says he's going to cut his workforce by 10%, and Facebook is cutting back on, its hiring, and it's just going across the board, these big companies. And, maybe there might be less demand for some of these hot languages. So from a more of a long-term perspective, mainframe could be interesting. It could be one of those areas that people just ignore, but that could be a benefit to those that are looking for a good opportunity.
Right. I've spoken to some college professors, and they say that the students don't necessarily view them as legacy languages or see it as something that's outdated. They take to it quite well. They treat it as just another language,
Mhm.
and they really do adapt to it well.
I think that's a really good point. I've been around for a long time. I mean, no, I haven't been around since COBOL was created, but
Right.
I've been around for a long time. And I know all the jokes about COBOL and mainframes and so forth. And but if you're younger, you haven't heard of that.
Right.
So you may not know that COBOL's been around since 1959. You may not have all that baggage, which is great. Really good benefit of being young, believe me.
Right.
so so take that as an advantage. Don't bring those preconceptions to the table. They could block you from a great opportunity.
So in modern mainframe development, you cover the history of the mainframe,
Mhm.
which we just went over a little bit, as well as newer developments on the platform. How is working on the mainframe today different than, say, 30 years ago?
Yeah, in the book is really two parts. There's first half is traditional mainframe development, and then the second half is the more modern part of it. Now, the fact is, if you want to be a mainframe developer, you still have to learn some of the legacy. There's something called ISPF, which is a text-based environment to do your coding. It has different panels and menus and so forth, but it's not the typical development environment you would see with VS Code, although there are integrations with VS Code to mainframe.
Right.
So you do need to understand some of these things like DB2 and so forth, which is a database. You need to know those things. But the good news is that as the market grows and there's a need to bring on more programmers, especially those that have familiar, they have their background is with modern systems and languages. These companies and organizations realize that they have to make some changes. So you may have a more modern development environment nowadays that looks like just any other. So, and there's some ways there are some old timers in mainframe, and I know a lot of them, and they're awesome people, but they probably won't change, and that's fine,
Right.
But the new recruits coming in, you don't have to necessarily be tied to some of these older systems, but you do need to know them.
Right. So traditionally, the mainframe's been treated as a siloed, separate environment. How have changes in attitudes and practices, like the adoption of DevOps, changed this?
Yeah, and speaking of BMC, they've done some great surveys on this, and
All right.
it shows that those companies that are breaking down the silos, and it really shouldn't be a surprise, are doing really well. They're digitally transforming their organizations. They're becoming more competitive. And again, this should not be a shock. You just can't have mainframes just do their own thing and the front end people or whoever on the other side do their own thing. You just can't do that anymore. So now some organizations do, and that'll be to their detriment. But I think over time, even those organizations that kind of cling to the old ways are going to realize they can't do that anymore. And they don't have to. I mean, again, there are tools and approaches, like you mentioned, DevOps, where they can break some of those barriers. It takes some time. That's the other thing too. And it's not just throwing technology at it. It's a
Right.
change in culture. It's change in doing things. It takes leadership. And so it may take a couple of years for that to take place, but that's fine. But you'll see some big results from it. And again, the BMC surveys have shown that out.
So you've written in the past about artificial intelligence, machine learning. How have those helped to change the landscape of mainframe development or of careers in general on the mainframe?
Mm-hmm. It's definitely opened up opportunities. Mainframes have huge amounts of data and mission critical data. They manage some of the most important processes, credit cards or HR, a lot of back office, insurance claims, things of that sort. And data is the most critical part of AI. I mean, you can have a nice fancy algorithm, but big deal. I mean, you can pull those, off the web for free. Data, you can't. It's a lot harder to get data and also quality data and structured data. So a lot of this is structured data. It's a lot of data. It's useful data, and it can be used to create some very interesting models. And it could be a competitive advantage for some of these older companies. And usually these are financial services, insurance, energy, and so forth. But they're sitting on so much data, and also the new IBM systems are coming right on the system itself. They
Right.
have AI capability. So it's a lot easier to do that nowadays. And I think it's just another source of growth for mainframe and excitement for those that are looking for a career in this area.
Right. You mentioned the COVID-19 pandemic and the increase in demand on mainframe systems,
Hmm.
as well as not having the mainframe be siloed and have it keep up with development on other platforms.
Hmm.
Cloud computing comes into that.
Hmm.
How does the modern mainframe fit into cloud and hybrid environments?
Hmm. Even though there are silos, that's probably more of a cultural thing. Technologically, there really shouldn't be silos because it's easy to have API calls between mainframes and mobile apps or AWS and so forth. So from a technology standpoint, there can be seamless integration between these types of systems. And there are also transformation projects that are going on with mainframes where they'll take parts of the workloads of the mainframes and move them to the cloud. It might be more cost effective and it might allow for better analytics. There's certain things that the mainframe does very well. Again, processing credit cards. If it took 10 minutes to process your credit card transaction, people would not be too happy about that situation.
Right.
And that could happen if you use more of a cloud system where there's a lot of latency and so forth. With the mainframe, there's certain things the technology does extremely well. Some others that it just wasn't built, just not built for it. And so maybe offload those to the cloud, and there are ways to do that. And that's another opportunity for developers to, if you have a background with AWS and cloud and some of the modern approaches, but also understand mainframe, you could work on those types of projects. And there's a lot. Then there are many of those projects today.
Have you heard of or talked to people who maybe work on more than one platform or cross between them? Is that something that you've heard of happening where people can leverage their experience on distributed platforms
Hmm.
or on mainframe platforms and help bridge the gap between them?
Absolutely, absolutely. There are unicorns out there.
Right.
Developers are pretty smart people, and they love to try to learn new things. So yeah, you could have this background in distributed systems, AWS, and the modern systems, and I want to move over to mainframe and see how to make those work together. Absolutely, it doesn't take years to learn mainframe. It's just like any other system. It does take some time, but it doesn't take a long time. So yeah, you could be proficient in both multi platforms if you want to, and that'll definitely make you stand out. I mean,
Yes.
those are where the big projects and the high priority projects are for companies. For those types of skill sets where they can move from one to the other.
Right. And overall, what we've just discussed, I think, underscores the point that one platform, namely the mainframe, can't drag down the others. It can't be the weak link. It has to
Hmm.
keep up with innovation and with development in other areas of the business.
Hmm. 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 Yeah, and IBM is, when it comes to mainframe, is the primary system, definitely here in the United States. And I think they've done a really good job of upgrading the system. and innovating their systems and adding new things to it. Buying Red Hat, I think, was a very important acquisition because you've seen a lot more open source on mainframe. I think that's very helpful. So, I do think the platform is getting much better. It's improving, and there's more openness to new ideas. So I think that's a positive. It's not always been that way, but I think that's a positive trend today.
How do you think organizations like the Open Mainframe Project and
Mhm.
Project Zoe have helped in that regard?
Yeah, I do cover that in the book. It's a way to, you could use VS Code to connect with a mainframe and develop on VS Code. And you're seeing more organizations take that approach. So yeah, I think those are very helpful. And I think it's still early days,
Right.
but you're seeing, I think BMC is a big supporter of that, and other major mainframe software developers are. So, once you get buy-in from big players, that'll definitely make it so there'll be more adoption.
I'll insert a quick reminder here that we're discussing your new book, Modern Mainframe Development, COBOL, Databases, and Next Generation Approaches, which not only covers the history of the mainframe and takes a look at development on the platform, but also looks to the future. So overall, how is mainframe modernization changing the outlook of the future of the platform?
Well, in some ways, you would think it's not positive because there are organizations that want to get off the mainframe, and that
Right.
would be considered modernization. There is I won't mention the name, but there's a company in Europe that did a modernization project to get completely off the mainframe, and they did get off the mainframe. The only problem is it took 20 years to do that, and who knows how much money it took.
Right.
Um, there are famous stories of government agencies, like the DMVs here in the United States, that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on projects to get off the mainframe, and it just never worked. I mean, literally, there were just disasters. So the modernization projects are not usually about replacements, but they're about, again, taking certain workloads from the mainframe and putting them, say, into the cloud. And it's a more strategic way of looking at modernization, not about we're going to have to just completely get rid of these systems mindset. But I do think even if there's some of these workloads are taken off the mainframe, I think there'll still be a lot of growth because there are things that the mainframe can do that other systems really can't do. And if you look at the numbers from IBM, that it's still a growing business, and there is a move to digitization around the world, and these systems will help for that. So yeah, I think the long-term prospects look pretty good, and the modernization projects are great opportunities for developers because make it clear too that traditionally development for mainframe was about maintenance. Um,
Right.
you know, it wasn't about creating new code or new application. That is starting to change because of these modernization efforts. That there's more application development than ever before.
A lot of surveys have shown and anecdotal experience has shown that people entering the workforce now are looking in a lot of ways to make a difference, having it be more than just a job. They want something that's powerful, that's useful, that they're making a difference. Tying in with what we just discussed,
Mhm,
how can a career in the mainframe help make that difference and
mhm,
help do meaningful work?
mhm. One is scale. You don't buy a mainframe for a little, proof of concept, MVP, tiny app. You buy a mainframe to do some big things. If you're working on mainframe, you're working at scale. Now, a lot of development is for back office for businesses. It could be for handling payroll. Anyone who's gotten their payroll check, if it's on time, that's what you want. If it's not on time, yeah, you're making a lot of people happy, and when the payroll goes out on time.
Right.
That's how you can make a difference in people's lives. Or again, bringing it back to what I talked about before with unemployment insurance. People are in a bad situation and they need that check.
Right.
And so the COBOL developers were able to come in and solve that problem. And they helped a lot, they probably helped millions of people in a unusual situation because of the pandemic. And it's the other thing to keep in mind too is that a lot of governments use mainframes. and governments are about providing services to their populations. And so that's what a lot of the applications do. So, you could be working on those types of projects and making a difference in the world.
Right. And the mainframe is more prevalent than I think is really appreciated a lot of the time, or is outwardly apparent, that how many of your day-to-day activities, checking your bank balance, insurance, flights, like you said, with the unemployment insurance,
Mhm.
et cetera, how much these actually access mainframe systems, but aren't necessarily apparent because people aren't accessing them on the front end.
Right. Most of this back end. One of the first major applications for mainframes was the airline reservation system, Sabre, which was created by American Airlines and IBM. It took years. But just imagine before that, you'd have to call a travel agent, and I really don't know what they would have done. I mean, I guess they have pieces of paper where they take a
Right.
reservation and then they call the airline. I mean, I have no idea. It was not the most efficient way. And as air travel started to emerge and grow so fast, it was just untenable. There was just no way you could operate in that manner. You had to have automation. And so that became one of the most important use cases for mainframes. And by the way, it's still done today that way. I
Right.
mean, mainframes will control a lot of airline reservations. Telcos, a lot of these telcos have been around for a long time, and they sell mobile phones. Well, most of that billing and activation is done by mainframes.
Right.
So on a daily basis, whether you buy an airline ticket, you process a credit card, you have to make a claim for insurance, just all these things that happen and that need to be done correctly and they need to be done efficiently and fast. A lot of times they're done by mainframe. So yeah, we don't realize if we got rid of all these mainframes, we'd be in some big trouble in this world.
Right. So, do you have any final thoughts to share on the subject?
Yeah, I mean, I think key point here is mainframes, in my opinion, and I think the opinion of others who look at this market, for developers is a great opportunity. And it's more than maintenance programming. You can develop some really cool applications, and you can also figure out challenges of how to take what are legacy systems and bring them into the modern world and connect them with more modern systems. And the other thing too, and we haven't talked about it, but I think is important to mention is that all the hyperscalers, Google, AWS, Microsoft, they all have mainframe divisions. They realize that if they want to continue to grow, they're going to have to find workloads to target. And really, the when it comes to the cloud, one of the last major opportunities is mainframe. So if you're looking at a job for mainframe, you could be working at Google or BMC, but there's a lot of opportunities and developing tools like BMC or migration projects like Google. There's just so many ways you can look at this market. And as things may not be as bright as they were just even a few months ago for IT and development, I think this is a bright area and one to at least consider and take a look at. And I think it's long term too. I mean, I don't think this is just
Right.
something that's going to be a 1 or 2 year process. Just the fact that there's so many people who are retiring and they're just going to have to make up for that somehow. There's going to be a need for training and development and reskilling. And I think that's really good news for developers looking for opportunities.
Well, thank you again for joining us today.
Yeah.
I've covered a lot of ground, and you've
Yeah.
given some great insight into the mainframe, not only as a career opportunity, but as a vital piece of the IT landscape. So, thanks again for joining us.
Oh, thank you very much. And everyone, good luck on your career journeys.
And your book will help. So, thank you for that too.
Thank you.
I'll include links in the show notes to your new book, Modern Mainframe Development, COBOL Databases and Next Generation Approaches, and some other helpful resources. Thank you again to everyone listening today. We'll talk to you next time on the Modern Mainframe. Take care. You're listening to the Modern Mainframe, BMC's intelligent Z optimization and transformation podcast, covering the latest trends and issues on the mainframe and how BMC AIME and BMC CompuWare Solutions can help you build a mainframe inclusive DevOps toolchain.